Well, welcome back to It's an Inside Job podcast. I'm your host, Jason Lim. Now, this podcast is dedicated to helping you to help yourself and others to become more mentally and emotionally resilient so you can be better at bouncing back from life's inevitable setbacks. Now, on It's an Inside Job, we decode the science and stories of resilience into practical advice, skills, and strategies that you can use to impact your life and those around you. Now, with that said, let's slip into the stream. Well, welcome back. I appreciate you showing up for a new week. For many people, 2023 is kind of turbulent. It's kind of not having your feet on stable ground. A lot of people describe it as having a lot of question marks hanging in the air. And I think one place we can find stability, if we're lucky enough, is our place of work, where we go every day, because it gives a sense of routine. We have responsibilities, we have roles, and we show up every day. And sometimes, as boring as that may sound, sometimes in a turbulent world, having that consistency and predictability and sense of routine gives us a sense of stability, because it's something where we feel a sense of autonomy, where we have a sense of certainty, where we know we can ply our trade and feel a sense of action and effort and see progression in what we do. Sometimes small, sometimes big. But of course, that's only a small part of the picture. What else can make us feel grounded in our place of work is when we feel there's a sense of diversity, there's a sense of inclusion, there's a sense of equality, where there's a sense that we belong, that we are valued, we feel connected, and we feel secure. Pretty much, we feel psychological safety. And it's to these last few terms that I want to address and dedicate this episode to. And so I'm very happy to be joined by Astrid Skaugseth. Astrid is the CEO of SHE Community, and SHE is an acronym for Social Human Equity. And SHE Community's goal, its mission, its vision is to promote change until all are included. So let me take a moment to introduce Astrid. Astrid joined SHE Community back in January of 2022. Her background is mainly from EY, where she almost spent 20 years in positions as COO of EY Norway, COO of Tax Law Nordics, and EY Nordics Sustainability Lead. She has a demonstrated history of working with business processes, improvement, change management, and strategy, with focus on execution and sustainable value creation. She has a passion for actions contributing to making the world a better and more sustainable place, consistently pushing for strategic thinking, partnership and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She believes that the true change can only be achieved when we promote and support gender equality and inclusion in all aspects of life. So with that said, let's slip into the stream and meet Astrid Skaugseth. Well, Astrid, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being able to show up and to contribute. I was wondering, maybe we can begin the conversation by you telling us a little about who you are and what you do.
Well, of course, and thank you, Jason, for inviting me to this spot. It's highly appreciated. Well, my name is Astrid Skaugseth, and I started as the new CEO for SHE Community 1 year ago. And before that, I actually spent my entire career in EY. Coming from a huge global corporate firm and entered into the entrepreneurship world, which is something that I really enjoy.
Thank you for the introduction. I was wondering, maybe we could talk about SHE Community.
Well, SHE is actually standing for Social Human Equity, and we did that reintroduction last fall. And the reason for us doing that was because we saw that it was it's very important to actually embrace a broader aspect of diversity inclusion. It was actually Heidi Aven, who is the founder of SHE. She started this organization back in 2014. And she did that because she wanted to close the gender economic gap, but also close the gender gap in general. And she did that because, or based on her own experiences as a woman. So she quickly saw that there were some injustice when it comes to how women were treated, especially when it comes to getting funding from investors. So that is actually the history of she, and she started it as a women network. Mm-hmm. But she quite soon saw that, working with gender is, of course, very important. It is something that you, by legislation, still is something you need to report on and is allowed to count. But in addition to gender, you have a lot of many other diversity indicators, which is also very important to actually embrace and dare to talk about. So that's why me and Heidi together, we reintroduced she to social human equity to really grasp all diversity indicators as a whole, and also embed this and also take the dialogue out there, how important it is to grasp the S in ESG in order to actually meet the environmental goals, but also the economic goals. So we need to, I think, we need to be able to have several thoughts in our minds when discussing social sustainability.
This podcast goes out to more of an international audience. And so I think when the world looks at Norway or Sweden or Finland, the Nordics and Scandinavia, they see it as very progressive, and which it is. And so for some of the listeners, that might be surprising to hear that there was, and there still probably is to some extent, a financial disparity between what men and women earn, just to keep it black and white right now. And so that even shows that even in progressive countries such as Norway, there is still a fight to be fought, and that for equity to be put into place. So it's, Norway is much ahead of the game, but it still shows that there are efforts and initiatives, and we need to be cognizant of these differences. And so my question to you is, people talk about social sustainability. Could you kind of define what that is from your perspective?
Yes, of course I can. I think social sustainability, plays a crucial part in the creation of long-term sustainable growth, because it can actually unlock new markets. It can aid in the retention and attraction for business partners, but it can also ensure that we are utilizing the depth of our talent pools, engaging with new perspectives and innovation, and recenter the productivity and profit through the lens of social equity. So social sustainability is actually a commitment to conduct businesses in a way that benefits society and protects the people. It means that we can create better and more inclusive workplaces, and the society becomes better as a whole due to that. Yeah, and I think, in order to do so, it actually entails a dedication to providing equal opportunities to everyone, regarding of their background, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, or ability.
When we look at this nuts and bolts, and when people are hiring and they're actually looking at the resumes or CVs, there are some countries that say, when you hand in a CV, please don't put your name, your gender, your age on anything. And so when the person is trying to decide who to think, all they see is the experience and the education of that person. I mean, what is your opinion about that, about stripping away all those sort of identity markers on a CV or a resume?
What you are referring to now, Jason, is what many companies have started to do now, and that is called blind recruiting.
Yes.
And I think that could actually be an important move, because we all also have unconscious biases. It is not out of bad will, but it is that we are often choosing, and this is also based on research, that we are often choosing people which is very, like alike that we are. So I think, dependent on, of course, which sector and job, I think, like promoting and embedding blind recruiting could actually be a very good move for many companies to start with.
There's two issues that I see. When we're talking about gender equality, what I see with a lot of my older clients, they could be 55 plus. What they are worried about is, forgive the term, but age discrimination. I mean, they've got a lot of experience, they've got a lot of knowledge, and they got a lot of know-how. But younger people coming in the market, as important as it is for them, they themselves feel that they are not going to get the next position. So they have to stick with their company till retirement. I'm not saying that's everybody, Astrid, but I think a lot of people around that age start fearing it for their career or their prospects as they come closer to that retirement age. What is your opinion about that?
Oh, I think that is a very valid point. It is there, but I also see a trend where this is maybe improving now. I have not read any research on it, but I think the companies are more aware. And I think looking at the climate around us now and, like working very actively to close this generational gap is very important, because the young generation are entering the workforce now with completely other glasses on when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, to say, the older generation can actually benefit of that view. But we mustn't forget that the experience and the value that my generation has and the generation before that again have is very important as well. So what I miss and what I want to see now is a more, like balanced discussions between these generations in order to take the best from both sides, if I can say it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a very salient point, because like in North America, what we have sometimes as a challenge is that someone will be hired because of their race and not because of their competency so much, right? And that person, and that person themselves feels like, okay, they didn't hire me for my knowledge or my education, but they hired me because of the color of my skin or my ethnicity or my gender. And so I think that's sometimes something why blind recruitment is a very important thing. But I also think that sometimes where you have these cognitive biases, these implicit biases that you speak of, where sometimes we hire people just because of one particular, demographic. So what you have is you almost have reverse discrimination. So I think it's a very fine line that recruiters or people hiring for positions have to be very cautious of.
Agree. And, and I think, that is exactly what you were saying, Jason, that is a kind of discrimination as well. I think the discussion around this should actually be in a way that we are using our, how should I say this, in a good way, but that we are actually using a bit of common sense here. Regardless of age, identity, I think we are at the stage in this world where we all need to grow and improve our awareness around this. We need to really deep dive into the growth mindset. I think we need to be a bit better on listening to people. And also dare to have those dialogues with people which we may not, naturally speak to. Because I am seeing now that companies and people actually that we are, working and discussing things from a, kind of silo point of view, instead of collaborate and actually dare to have those small conversations with people that we can learn something new from. And that is regardless of, like race or gender or sexual orientation. Like let's be a bit more open-minded and dare to have those dialogues in order to act in a better way.
So just to kind of segue into that, do you feel companies are doing enough?
Yes and no. We have seen improvements in the E&I strategy, and especially when it comes to legislation. But when it comes to the real actions, I don't think that organizations are doing enough to move beyond what is currently required. And there are multitude of ways to measure diversity within a company today, especially in regard to gender. But diversity cannot be maintained without, like true inclusion. And in order to embed inclusion, we have to challenge our own perspective and not be afraid to, like I said before, not be afraid to initiate those difficult conversations, and maybe listen to those who we maybe not are talking to each day and be able to implement changes based on that. And for companies and people, I think, like measurements, discussions, and dialogues are only the first step. And then we need to act in order to do that. And I think, the last bit of it, the act is something that I really see is missing out there still, unfortunately.
I think for a lot of leaders and a lot of companies, this can be a minefield. This can be very confusing. When we talk about siloed conversations, how do you take it beyond the silos? How does that look day to day within an organization to expand the diversity of conversation to address these issues? What have you seen that's worked?
I think, it all starts with a commitment and a inclusive leadership approach from the top. That is important. This is, like this agenda is not something that you can act on or fake. Like this is something that you really need to engage in, because it all starts with how you are as a person. It starts with how you are meeting other people. It starts with how you are communicating this. How do you respect others? How do you treat them? So it all starts with who you are as a person. And that person is something that you are bringing into the organization that you work with, and it will have, like hopefully those positive ripple effects out in this society as a whole. So I think, like the commitment and the learning and building the awareness at the top is very, very important. And then you just need to, like embed this. You need to build this culture where people are feeling that they are welcomed, that they are trusted, that there is that this organization is a place where they are happy to work, or that this is an organization where the employees are proud in working at. I think that is so important, and that means that you need to build trust. You need to be transparent, and not least, you need to be authentic. This is not something that you can fake as a leader or as a person on long term. The best companies that I have really seen has been on this journey is, of course, that you build this awareness throughout the entire company, and that you're talking about it, and that you dare to be transparent and authentic when you are acting on it.
Just to understand the she community itself, it's focused on sort of corporate organizations per se, I guess, office workers and such, because you have a lot of trade craft such as bricklayers and mechanics and construction workers, where that tends to be a very male-dominated industries. And so I guess when she community is looking at what it's more about organization, is that more sort of knowledge-based workers or professionals? Just to understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, it's actually both. We are working, cross sectors. So, but I also think to bring this discussion in those sectors where it is very, male dominated is also very important, because we still have a lot of girls and women who want to enter that sector as well. But if we do not train those men to be, inclusive, those girls or women will actually most likely leave. And we know that, a collaboration between men or women or other, personal identities is actually the best thing for the really good solutions. So for us, we are working cross-sector, and we are working with sectors which is both very male-dominated, but also with sectors which is very female-dominated, where we, of course, are inviting men as well.
Why this is so important to me and why I wanted to contribute and have you on the podcast is because I have two daughters myself. They're both 15, they're twin girls, and they're coming up in the game. And I also think that my wife also works for one of Norway's major banks, and it's also there. So, I mean, just from my own personal sphere of my family, I think what she is delivering and its objectives are important, because what you plant now, the seeds that this community plants now, will reap benefits far into the future when we harvest this for future generations. And I don't say this lightly to compliment. I mean, for me, this is a sincere and genuine observation that I think is so needed right now. And when you think about Norway, it is a very, very progressive country in mindset, thinking about secularism and humanism and equality, all of these things that make the society flourish. But it shows that we can't take things for granted, that we still need to consciously put the effort in to have the tough conversations and to break down some of these ceilings, if I may use that term. And so that's why I think it's so relevant what you guys are doing as a community, as a group, as an organization. When we're talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and social sustainability, I think Astrid made a very good point. We need to have the conversations. We need to dare to have the conversations and not to be too sensitive, to actually use common sense. And I think that is the key, where we don't get polarized. We don't get so sensitive that we take everything as an insult. If we're going to have these candid conversations, it means we have to show up, willing to hear other people's perspectives, to debate, to discuss, and to move things forward. Another thing that stood out to me is when Astrid said, quote, "In order to embed inclusion, we have to challenge our own perspectives," end quote. And I think that's the key. We need to challenge our own perspectives. And so in the next part of our conversation, Astrid talks about the diverse community that she is. And there are three main branches: She Conference, She Index, and She Leads. And on each of these fronts, She community is promoting change, challenging perspectives, and stimulating conversation.
What we are doing, we are actually promoting change until all people are included. And in order to reach or to work towards that mission or vision, actually, is that we need to build awareness and competence around social sustainability and social equity. And we are doing that through mainly 3 initiatives through SHE. And that is the SHE conference, which is a yearly event where we gather, stakeholders from the whole ecosystem, from businesses, students, investors, startups, politicians, and international state leaders, to have a day where we're actually discussing best practices when it comes to social sustainability, but also together see if we can find the good solution in order to actually improve on this important agenda. The second initiative that we are doing is that we are providing a tool called the SHE Index. That is a tech tool where companies and investors can use to measure the progress on how gender balanced the organization or the investor portfolio is. And so the main aim with that is, of course, to provide a solution where companies get action plans and advices based on real evidence-based data in order to actually be better when it comes to gender balanced. And the third thing that we are doing is, of course, it's a top leadership program which is called SHE Leads, where we are gathering 25 women and we are matchmaking them with a mentor, and we are providing them with a toolbox in order to step into a top leadership position ahead. So we are covering, all aspects. Again, back to the conversation and dialogue and collaboration. That is so important in order to move ahead with this. And also really to build the competence and awareness of why social sustainability is so important. Because I think in the world today and how the world is, which is, with the geopolitical stuff that we are seeing around us now, we have a lot of crises going on. And I think to actually grasp the people and the social aspect of the broader sustainability agenda is so important. And we are not doing that. We are only tapping into a small piece. And we are, excluding a lot of people which have a really valuable perspective to add. And I think for us to find the good solutions and to actually maybe get peace in the world, I think we really need to start to talk together and work together.
At the end of the day, it is about diplomacy. Yeah. It is about including people, because, even nations, when they feel trodden on, they want to strike back in whatever way they want to strike back. And that comes down for the nation state all the way down to the individual. At the end of the day, we're all ruled by our basic psychology, our wetware programming. And pretty much we understand what makes the human psyche tick. And if we talk about all those things that you talked about, social sustainability, diversity, inclusion, equity, all of these key words, when it comes to the index and the leads and the conference to include people, they're all based on the same fundamentals of the organization.
Yes, and I think, and it also, when we are discussing, these thematics with organization or people or state leaders, I really like to say that it all is, coming down to the common sense, because I think it is important that we don't become too rigid when we speak about this, because then we can quickly become wrapped up in the idealism of the concept, while forgetting how simple it is to put this into to practice in small and big ways. And the challenges to achieving social equity are many, but being self-aware is one of the most important factors to actually address this. And when we are able to expand our social awareness and stretch into the realm of the unknown, explore new opportunities, I think we are also more vulnerable, because we are offering our trust and opening ourselves to the unknown. And having this strong sense of self and being authentically you is the major step in building this trust, which again makes you more inclusive. So I think it sounds very simple, and I think it is, but I have practiced on, I have really, trained myself over many years to do this, and, be more open-minded, because I truly believe that, all the people, we are the asset for innovation, and we need to tap into all those people in order, to see, to be a part of the sustainable future and the sustainable growth that the world needs.
The world, as you said, are facing so many different challenges that by tapping into diverse opinions, and then that could be from different disciplines, from different areas of study, from different types of schools, not just gender or ethnicity or culture. But I mean, if you really expand it, we will crack the code of a lot of these challenges we have. But the question is, it just takes time. And so one thing I find very interesting, you have She Leads, where you work with professional women to mentor them and to teach them the skills and a toolbox. I was wondering, does it, as a community, does it have any initiatives within business schools or at universities with young people coming into the game? Because I understand a lot of what you guys do is from the top down, and that's very important to influence things downwards. But how about bottom up? I mean, starting with students and before they even get into the game.
That is a very good question, and it's really important, because I think you really need to start on this journey, back in the school, or, really early. What we are doing now is that we are actually introducing the She Young concept as well. And the first track of that is something that we will have on the She Conference now in April, where we are invited students from various schools and putting them on stage together with, my generations, to actually discuss the best solutions. And I mentioned it before, we are doing that because the young voices and the glasses that they have on when we are talking about sustainability, both from the environmental point of view, the social point of view, and the economical point of view, is completely different than the lens that my generation and the generation before that is doing or have done. So I think the conversation and the learning between the generations is also crucial in order to have a sustainable growth. She Young is something that is introduced now because they do have and should have a really important voice in this.
When we look at She in itself, I mean, how does the organization measure its impact and its success in all the different realms in which you work, which is quite broad?
Yeah, it is. Well, it is, with respect to the SHE index, it's very, quantitative, because we see, how the companies is actually improving on their SHE index score throughout the years. So I usually say to companies who is joining, it doesn't matter what the SHE index score is the first year, but it is how the scores improve over the years, which is important. So that is how we are, measuring the real, impact on how to work with gender balance. When it comes to the impact on the SHE conference, it is just knowing that we are gathering more than 4,000 people in person in 3 different countries last year, discussing this, and also the feedback that we are receiving, that the people actually felt something, learned something, and had really good discussion during that day. That is awesome. And in addition to that, we had in 2022, yes, we had 8,000 people looking at the same content from 70 countries around the world.
So that's incredible.
Yeah. And back in 2021, we have 15,000 people watching the SHE conference from almost 100 countries. So the impact is that we are making sure that the content, the speakers, the corporates, that they all have something to bring in order for us to learn, to feel, but also connect, so that we can do a collaboration on this agenda. And of course, with the SHE Leads program, it is good to see all these women grow and really, get this self-confidence, so they have the belief that they will actually, really reach the top, which they want. And they are as well, I think. And that is the way you need to work with this. And it is quite broad what we are doing now, but we are tapping into various sectors, like stakeholders, ecosystems. And when we're doing that from many countries, we will, build the awareness and then have the impact of that.
One thing about this SHE conference, since it reaches so many people in so many different countries, I think what you were talking about, when you have people talking about a particular issue on stage and people are listening to the diverse opinions and such, it becomes almost a template of how to have those conversations, how to breach those conversations. Because people can think, as you said, things can become too complex. But sometimes it's just simplified. Here's the point. Let's talk around the point. And then that creates a discussion. And I think this is a great way to breach that silence, to breach that biases by having conversations. And when people see this, this is how it's done. This is how people can take it. This is how we can have constructive conflict or constructive debate about something. And look at these people. They're not getting offended. They're allowed to have their different opinions, and they're talking like civil people. Not everyone's super defensive or taking it personally.
It's conversation, but I also like to bring in, I think it also is important to try to have those uncomfortable, discussions with respect to diversity or inclusion as well. Not to challenge everybody, but, because this is something that companies and people are struggling with, because social sustainability is tough, because most of the topics within that is not something that you can measure, right? It's something that you need to work with, and it's something, that people are feel something around. And when feelings is arising, with people, it can be quite tough. And it's sometimes hard to actually discuss. But again, like having these conversations where it is safe, you are bringing, like people together from different generations, different sectors, state leaders. And I think they are also very important to bring in because they are the policy makers. But also, like showcase the best practices from companies who has gone beyond what is required from a legislation point of view. I think that is really, really meaningful for others to hear more about. But you also have those really, like strong personal impact stories from people who has felt things, experienced things that maybe we haven't. And I find myself that I have learned so much from those because they are bringing things to my awareness that maybe I haven't thought about before, or I can actually feel what they have felt. And I also think in order to be more inclusive with other people, you need to be open-minded on your own, like self-being, but also your, like allowing yourself to feel more. So the SHE conference is for sure a place for building your awareness, gain new competence around things, network with other people, and have those really, really good dialogues, for sure. So, and I also see that we are running, like workshop with clients throughout the year. And I see, like when we have those workshop where we are putting, like 10 to 15 people together, sharing competence across, that is what our clients really, really value the most.
When you said, sometimes we don't get the chance to experience what other people experience. And sometimes by having a conversation with them, we understand a slice of life that we would have never uncovered or even been aware of if we hadn't talked to those individuals. What you were talking about really chimes with me, because when I originally started this podcast, it was just going to be me and the mic sharing some techniques of how to build resilience. But I saw that I only had a slice of the picture. And that's why I wanted to invite people of your caliber on to speak from different aspects. I tell you, I'm learning so much talking to different guests from different walks of life, from different experiences, some very tragic, some amazing, but all of it adds to my dimension and my vibrancy of understanding this sort of the human dimension. And I think this goes a long way to think about diversity and inclusion in a different way, because sometimes I get worried because I talk about psychological safety and resilience and mental well-being and such a lot from a sort of a cognitive neuroscience perspective. But when I'm in corporations, sometimes I worry that things like psychological safety become just buzzwords, more management speak. And that's why I think you guys, when you have the index, you have SHE Young, SHE Leads, and the SHE Conference, it takes it from the buzzword. It actually fills it with, it becomes meat, bones, and blood. We understand what this is. They're not just abstract terms, but they actually have real meaning and real impact. And that's why all these different initiatives you guys have will hit at all sorts of levels. And hopefully when you have many horses running in the race, one of them will pass that finishing line. At least that's what I see it as.
I agree. And I think, like we just need to be aware, and we need to tell ourselves that it is not about he or she or me. It is about us as humans beings. And that, like behind, like gender or backgrounds or titles, we are all human beings. And again, we all have, like a valuable perspective. And I truly believe that the world is poorer, like without it, like a way to go, because, like still the bulk of leaders, investors or entrepreneurs, they are actually coming from the same, like overrepresented group. And that is what she is doing. We are actually born with a, like a desire to end this lack of balance.
In the final part of our conversation, Astrid and I talk about inclusion on both sides of the fence, where there has been a major focus on women and minorities, which is very important. And at the same time, Astrid points out that the pendulum can't swing too far to one end, that there needs to be a balanced approach to include everyone, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, rank, or responsibility. And also in the final part of this conversation, Astrid talks about her past as a leader, sitting in a very male-dominant team. She speaks candidly about her experience and her perceptions, and the skills that she learned along the way. So I hope you enjoyed this last part of this conversation with Astrid Skaugseth.
There's a strong focus on women, but how does the man's role come into play here? Because I think a lot of the times when we talk about diversity and equality, I think the pendulum can swing to the other side where we start actually excluding men and boys, and then you start seeing a reaction on that side. How do you think we should address this, or what do you think is important to talk about in this aspect of diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think that is a very good and interesting questions, because that is also something that I have heard and also discussed. But, like women have historically barred from financial security and advancement. And there are still many systematic reasons why women often don't get the same opportunities as men. That is for sure. But a gender balance means that women, men, and also those outside the gender binary all have the same opportunities. And to achieve this, we also have to look at the challenges that men are facing. In addition to this, I think we have to look at the men's role through the lens of intersectionality. And this is where equity plays a major part, I believe. Because, while equality simply means that everyone is treated the exact same way, regardless of individual needs and other differences, social equity is a way of achieving fairness for all identities and groups of people. So, and that actually means that everyone is provided with what they need to succeed, which in many cases means more personalized solutions. Yeah.
What are some of the stories you've heard where maybe this reverse discrimination has been, the pendulum has swung too far on the other side when it comes to men in general?
I think it's several. Okay. I can actually start by reflecting on how my 15-year-old son is looking at that. And he have asked me why there is a lot of, focus and discussion around the girls and not the boys. And that is a mirror of what he is reading and seeing. But in his everyday life, he actually do not care about this, because they do have different glasses on than I have. But if we are bringing this into the corporate life, I do also sense a feeling, and that is also stories that that men have come to me with, is that they actually are also feeling this, because there is a huge focus on how women should come to the top, or women's network. What I usually discuss is with them and with women as well is that, okay, there is a reason for why it is like this now. It is, for example, that out of a leadership group today, it is 80% men and 20% women. So we really need to actually support them. But I think, again, that we need this collaboration between the men and the women. And I think that we, instead of, like only working with the women's network, we need to invite the men in, and we need to build the awareness on how, or even more inclusive they should be when women are getting that place on the table. So again, I see and sense that we are working a bit from each other instead of working together with this. I applaud networks where women and men can discuss this topic together with a 50-50 gender balanced.
I think that's such a vital point. I mean, if we just look at men in general, and again, this is generalities, not specific individuals. Men, especially who grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, were told to man up, don't deal with emotions, just soldier on. And a lot of men will not speak to this, even though they feel jaded, they feel pushed to the side. That's the programming they have. And it's not to make them victims, but a lot of men won't speak up. And I think that would speak to a lot of the numbers that we see increasing of suicide, of anxiety, of depression at all ages. And I think what you're saying is so important. And I guess the question is again, how do we do this? How do we include people? And I think, again, the She Conference, I think that is so important, because there, men have been invited to speak to these issues. And then all of a sudden, maybe that becomes a template, that becomes a way out, a way to discuss these difficult topics. The numbers are shocking across, at least the Western world. The numbers for the suicide and drug use and alcohol use for men are just going through the roof.
And I also saw, with respect to this, why, like the man is not speaking up and out on this is because, and this was a research from the US back in 2021. And one of the reasons was that they were afraid of losing respect from their male peers. That they really wanted to support, like the women agenda and really wanted to support the women, but they didn't dare because they were afraid of losing their stand and also the respect from their male peers. And that means that we really need to invite men in. We really need to, build the awareness of those small things which actually both men and women are doing, but the small things that is exclusive or not exclusive, but the small things where they are excluding people, but they do not think about it. So I think, just raising, the small things, discuss it and do that together. Again, back to the small dialogues is important. Because I know that many men, or almost every one of them, is not doing this out of bad will. It is often due to unconscious biases.
I think that's so true. I mean, mothers of sons see this, or I have two daughters and I have a son, and I can see both sides of the fence because they're just growing up into this world. I mean, they're in their teens, but they don't have the context of what we have from the 70s or the 80s or the 90s per se. And so they are just seeing it from their slice of life. And so it's so important to, as you said, to expand the breadth of the conversation, to take in these different points of views, because if not, I see things going off the other end. And I think you spoke to it before, vulnerability. I think men need to sometimes be more vulnerable because we think strength comes from soldiering up and being stoic and stiff upper lip and all that, moving on. But vulnerability is actually where the real strength is, the ability to, it's not losing face. It's about talking about our emotions and our thoughts. Because if you don't process it, it'll come out in other ways, such as anxiety or depression or rumination. And I think also men could be a lot better at self-compassion. They turn the compassion on to other people, their family, their friends, their colleagues. But when it comes to themselves, we turn that faucet off, where we're kind of berating ourselves and with self-critical thoughts. And I think it's not a man or woman issue. I think it's across both genders. But I think what you're saying about the men is to bring them into the conversation more and more. As you said, it's about humanity. It's not about genders per se.
No, exactly. And I also think, a practical solution or a move that we can do, which I have experienced myself, is, the strength of allyship. Because I was, earlier in my career, I was quite young into a new leadership team, and that leadership team consists actually of 8 men and 2 women. I came in there and I didn't feel that I had a voice on that table. I felt that I was, interrupted when I tried to say something, and I really, started to question why I actually was sitting at that table at all. And then after a couple of meetings, I actually reached out to one of my male peers, and I said to him, I really feel uncomfortable in those leadership meetings because I do not feel that I have a voice there, and questioning, the reason for me even being there. And he looked at me and he said, "You really, you are so strong and you are extrovert, and no, of course it is not like that." And I understood that, it was something that I felt, and they did have a completely, another view of me. And then I said to him, "Okay, but I actually need some help from you. I need you to be my ally. So in the next meeting, I want you to ask me what is my opinion with respect to that topic that we should discuss." So, and he said, "Wow, I haven't thought about that. That you need that helping hand." Because he looked at me as a strong, strong woman, and he did that. So he asked me in the next meeting, "Astrid, what is your opinion about this?" And I felt that then I had the voice, and then it was much easier for me to feel secure and actually take a seat at that table the next time and the time after that again. But that was, that small conversation that I had with him also brought the awareness to him that, wow, I haven't thought about this. Of course, I should help you. You have a voice here. And I also saw my responsibility to dare to, raise that hand.
And those are the small conversations you're talking about, right?
Exactly. And but also, being transparent about that and discussing this with him actually build the awareness with him, but also with me. And it was only a win-win situation. And I think both women and men should actually dare to do that and make sure that you have an ally which can support you when you feel you are a bit down. That is, and also up, of course. But I think that is also, a concrete tip that I will give everybody.
And I think that's a very important tip, because I work with a number of women that work in very male-dominated industries. They can be sometimes the only woman on a particular leadership team. I think that's really good advice to kind of talk to your male counterparts, those that you trust and respect, in which you can have a candid conversation, and that there'll be some sort of dialogue, something beneficial from that dialogue. What other recommendations would you give to professional women who are sitting by themselves in a very male-dominated team?
I would say that they should not be afraid to take that place, because it is a reason why they are there. And I think that many women, including myself, is very good at thinking, why do I sit here? What is my role? I'm the only female here, like we are a bit, we could be, good in a bad way of talking ourselves down. But remember that it is a reason why you are there. And also, discuss this with someone that you trust. Make sure, to prepare yourself to, I often did that. I decided upon today, I will actually take that voice. I will bring up that thematic or that topic. So I own the room a bit. And for each time I did that, I actually built, I build my self-confidence.
Yeah.
And that is something that I needed to train upon. But I also got the help from my ally. And I also got a lot of help and support from my mentor, which I have had now for 20 years.
Your mentor being a male or a female?
I actually have two. I have one male and one female. And that has been important for me to have, because I think I need to, again, we all have those valuable perspectives, and both of them are, very, very different than me. And they do work with completely, other sectors. So that have, learned me, and it has also put me in a position where I could be a bit more open-minded, and I have learned a lot and been challenged.
Well, that sounds like some really solid advice for people. I have one last question. You said, over time you practiced, and with the experience comes self-confidence. But if we rewind back to the first time where you took a quiet place at the table, but that day you decided to speak up, how did you come over that threshold? I mean, what did you specifically do? Because the reason I ask this is that male or female, sometimes the confidence is not there, and it's more comfortable just to be quiet and stay in the shadows, just be a shadow participant than to be an active participant. So I asked this question from both genders, from the human perspective. How did you come through that threshold? What did you do to push yourself to go from passive, a bystander, to active participant?
For that case, and I remember that's so good because it was, like a breakthrough for me. I prepared a lot, of course. And I guess I also over-prepared, which we often do. But I was sweating and I stuttered. I do that still. And that was one of my, really tough things, is that I stutter. So often when I enter into discussions or are speaking as here today, I often feel that I do not get my point out because I stutter. I was sweating, but I was very, very well prepared. I had been on that leadership group for a while, so I was very familiar with the dynamics, like who were speaking and who were not. So, I have, planned this for a while.
Okay.
So, and then I just, jumped into it. But again, before that, I had asked for advice to my ally, and he also, invited me in, said, Astrid, what is your opinion? So it was very planned. But it helped me.
Yeah.
But again, I would say that it is also very good to be that participant who is good to listening in. Because as a leader, I sat as a leader for many years as well. And I do believe that maybe, one of the big important things, or the most important things for a good leader, is to listen to those who is not speaking. And that is also something that I train to do. And that will also make you a good ally, because there is a reason why you or them are at that table. And you should invite them in and ask.
I think there's two things there. First of all, when it comes to the latter points, sometimes the quiet ones, the introvert, that is a very direct and simple way to to include inclusiveness by asking for what's their opinion. And sometimes if people are afraid to ask, sometimes it's just to raise your hand. Do you agree or disagree? And that's one way of including people.
Yeah.
But back to you. When you said there was that day where I felt I had to speak up, that shows me right there. That's a clear example of someone moving from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. There was someone who decided, okay, you know what? I need to get into the game and I need to speak my voice because I've been invited to this table and no one's going to invite me to speak. I have to get up there. You kind of planned it for your male ally to invite you, to give you the signage to come. But I think that is a clear indication of what a shift in mindset is, from fixed, being passive and quiet because I don't want to risk myself because of imposter syndrome or fear of conflict or whatever it is, to someone thinking, you know what, I got to step out of this comfort zone. I got to push myself a little. And I think that speaks volumes for someone out there when they're saying, I have to have a difficult conversation. Okay, well, this is how you find the courage and the confidence. It's not a snap, it's a dimmer switch. It's about practicing, it's about planning, it's about strategizing, it's about finding that constructive mind talk or self-talk to bring yourself there. And I think an important point you made was find an ally. You know, talk to someone where you can process your thoughts and emotions and perspective to see if your perspective is actually correct or if it needs to be adjusted. Is that what I understand you're saying?
Yes, it is. Just dare to jump out of it, like jump in it, or, like just dare to do it. Because again, you are there for a reason. You have done a really good job. So you do have something to come to the table with. Do it in a way that you feel is maybe not comfortable for you, but dare to take that place.
And I think that's so important. That's a very good reframe. Again, sorry about the cognitive psychology, but it's a really good reframe because, a lot of people, men and women, can feel a sense of imposter syndrome in specific areas of their life. And by saying that, look, this organization didn't put you here out of charity. They put you here because you bring something to the game, your knowledge and experience. So it's expected for you to speak up and share your opinions. It may not always float. It may actually sink, but you being invited to this table and it's to speak up, right? And I think that's a really good objective reframe to help people get off that imposter syndrome sometimes. And at least that's a lot of in cases, that's what I encourage in my coaching sessions is how to people to get beyond those beliefs that hinder them to find beliefs that actually help them. And sometimes the situation doesn't change, but what changes, Astrid, is their perspective of that situation. And there they find a sense of autonomy, a sense of certainty, and they understand specifically, as you did, you planned, you strategized over and over to do that. But that's the key. It's where do you take action? Where do you take effort? Because what you're talking about is the core of resilience. It's the ability to show up in adversity. Because for you to speak up in that male dominant things, that was kind of an adverse reaction on yourself, but you kind of, forgive the term, cowboyed up, got on your horse, cowgirled up, sorry, and you rode into it, right?
Yeah. And I also think the big learning of this was that no one in that room was expecting me, to have thought about myself in that way, because they all saw me as a, again, this strong woman daring to say whatever she wanted to say. But I wasn't like that. But they didn't know it. They actually believed that I would take that seat if I wanted to, but I felt that they didn't invite me in. So that conversation was needed.
Definitely. Everyone had the best intentions in there, but there were skewed perceptions. And until you had that conversation to align perceptions, because all those guys in the room thought, yeah, she's being invited to the table, she'll speak up. But you thinking, no, I feel like I'm shut down. I don't have a voice, or whatever, however you framed it. Forgive me for taking very simplistic.
No, that's fine.
But unless you have that conversation, and I think it's not to have the conversation in the entire room, But I think what you said is find that one ally or two allies that you trust and respect. And there's that respect and trust is mutual. It goes both ways. And I think that's a very simple, but a deeply profound way to build up someone's courage and confidence to step up. And it's also that's that inclusiveness you keep coming back to, right? Exactly. Diversity is easy. That's a checkbox, but it's the inclusion. That's the action. It's the invitation to come to the table and play with us.
Yeah, that's correct, Jason.
So if an organization wanted to learn more about what she does, about for example, the index, or they want to contribute because they truly believe in the values and the mission and the vision of your organization, how can they get involved?
They can give me a call. No, I will advise them to look into our web pages, which is the Social Human Equity, or they could follow us on LinkedIn, She Community Global, where we are, each week we are launching newsletter with respect to these thematics, within the social sustainability agenda. Yeah, of course, reach out. We have, room for companies or people or change makers that could add value to this important agenda.
I was wondering, was there any last advice you could leave with our listeners when it comes to those values that you stand for: diversity, inclusion, sustainability, social sustainability, and equity?
Yeah, my last advice will be, remember that diversity doesn't stick without inclusion. Diversity is easy. That is, often ticking the box. You really need to embed inclusion. So I think that is best advice. Go beyond what is the legally requirements and really work on the inclusion part.
Have some stretch goals.
Yes.
Definitely.
Have some stretchy goals, but really work on the inclusion, because that will not make your company culture better, but it will also make you as a human being better.
Well said. Well said. I think that is a great place to end the conversation. But to be continued, I hope to have you on again for a part 2 to see how things are progressing at the end of 2023, maybe. Well, Astrid, thank you very much for your time, your generosity of sharing your thoughts and your experiences with us today. I think it's such a vital objective to try to achieve. So thank you for that.
And thank you, Jason, for inviting me. It was my pleasure.
Great. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Well, folks, that was the brilliant Astrid Skaugseth, CEO of SHE Community. And the SHE acronym stands for Social Human Equity. And currently it has 3 focuses. It has SHE Conference, SHE Index, and SHE Lead. And just as a quick reminder, if you're interested in this community, and I'm sure everybody is, on April 18th and 19th, SHE Conference is going live at the Spectrum in Oslo, Norway. If you can't make it to Oslo, you can get tickets online for this brilliant conference. And so, Astrid, a personal thank you from me to you. Super, super thank you for coming on to the show and sharing your insights, your knowledge, your experience. It was a brilliant conversation. I learned a lot, and it's something I highly support. And for anyone who's interested in getting in contact with Astrid, I will leave all her contact information in the show notes. And as for the SHE Conference, Index, or SHE Leads, I will also leave the contact information in the show notes. But folks, that brings us to an end of another episode. I appreciate you showing up, and I hope this conversation has stimulated some thinking, and perhaps it will encourage you to take this conversation forward, because I think it's a conversation that's needed on all fronts. And as a call to action, if you could please recommend, subscribe, and rate this podcast, I'd highly appreciate it. And please share the podcast with 2 friends, 2 colleagues, 2 family members. And until the next time we meet, keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.
you.